Okay, yeah, so this is the plan stage meeting. We added a format to the handbook, which is linked at the top of the agenda. So to start with, we're doing team updates. Shane, did you want to get started there? Oh, yes, Shane, you are still here. Cool.
Yes, I'd like to. So everybody, please join me in welcoming Holly Reynolds to the Plan team as a senior product designer. She has a background that includes working at version 1. And I think she's an outstanding addition to the team, and I'm really excited to have her here. I hope you guys are too. Holly, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thank you so much. It's kind of funny because I'm hearing some of my friends from version 1 refer to GitLab as like Git 1 because there have been a few folks that have come over there from here. But yeah, I worked at version 1 for about 4 years. And in the past year, I spent working as lead product designer for an agency in Alabama called Airship. I was fully remote then as well. So got to have my feet wet with the great experience of being fully remote and absolutely love that. I've been a huge fan of GitLab for a long time, and I've heard nothing but fantastic things from my friends that work here about what a great company it is. So I'm really excited to be working with all of you and looking forward to just getting started.
Great, welcome, Holly. It's really exciting to have you join. Shane, I had a quick question for you, actually. So we've got 3 product designers in Plan now, and we have 3 groups within Plan, although the amount of work we do in those groups is not even across all 3. So we've got project management, portfolio management, and certify. At the moment, Annabelle and Alexis are just listed as the product designers for all 3 stages. Is that going to stay the same, just adding Holly to all 3, or what's the idea going forward there?
So I've asked Alexis and Annabelle, and this is how I'm approaching this with all stages, by the way, to think about how they might work within that environment of the subgroups. And there have been some different approaches to that on the UX team. We've documented those, and I can link to that issue. Some stages, the UXers are just aligning to those pillars or subgroups. But as you said, in some cases, the work isn't even across the 3, and so that doesn't make sense, right? Because we want to maximize UX value delivered and output and so on. Mm-hmm. So what I would like to do is since Annabelle and Alexis very much know the plan format, is to have them propose what they think makes sense for them and for you guys, and then we can sort of try that and learn and adapt as needed. But I'll go ahead and link to that. Yeah, I'll go ahead and link to that issue so you guys can see, just have some visibility into how teams, the models teams are trying in other stages. But yeah.
Great, thanks very much for that. Donald, you've also got someone to introduce?
I do. And actually, Alexis, while you're here, I don't think Annabelle's here, but have you put any thought into that whole, how the subgroup work would work on the design side?
Yeah, I mean, I have. I was actually going to talk about it with Shane today, but I think it's kind of an ongoing conversation right now, so we'll figure it out.
Awesome. Okay, so yes, I do have an introduction. Very excited to introduce Kong to the plan stage as a front-end engineer. Since we're not doing the introductions in the company call anymore, I'm going to ask the questions here to kind of introduce yourself to the team and anyone else watching the video. But if you could tell us where you were before GitLab, why you want to join the team, where you're located, and what you like to do for fun outside of work.
Hi everyone, I'm Kong. So I came here from JP Morgan, where I was a full stack developer. I live in Glasgow, and what I like to do for fun is play piano, play guitar, play video games. Yeah, and I also volunteer at Code Your Future, which helps refugees learn how to code. And the reason I wanted to come to GitLab was because I've heard many great things about them, and I really resonated with their philosophy of diversity, and inclusion. And I just heard great things about their values, and now I'm here. So I'm really happy to be on board and looking forward to working with all of you.
Awesome. Well, we're really excited to have you as part of the team. Sean?
Thanks. Welcome, Kong. So if anybody's curious, I'm here. Kong's here on a map of Scotland. So yeah, this is sort of team update, but it doesn't directly affect any of the teams that work on Plan, except that we have less work to do now. So there is an ecosystem team. So we've had an ecosystem PM for a while, but no engineers. We now have an engineering manager and a backend engineer, with more engineers joining in the next few weeks and months. The impact on us is mainly on the project management team, because the project management backend team, because that's kind of the catch-all one, and Jira integrations basically no longer belong to the plan stage. They belong to ecosystem, which is in enablement now, so it's in a completely different section, a completely different group, and Felipe is helping one of the new engineers on board. Heinrich's going to finish up what he's got left to do on the new integration, which is very little now. He just needs some help from Atlassian support, and yeah, it's a good time to hand that stuff over. We added this new section, big picture update. Oh, Donald, did you want to just say that as well?
They're adding a front-end engineer to the ecosystem team, I think at the end of September, and Kushal will be their buddy, so he'll be helping out also.
Cool, yeah, and I should have said, John and I are the onboarding buddy for the new manager, Nick, who's on the ecosystem team as well, because John's out this week and I'm out next week. We're kind of pairing on that. So yeah, another section we added to the agenda was big picture updates, which is great timing because, well, Gabe's got an update which relates to the next 1 and 3 years. So this is the perfect time to try out that new section and tell us all about that, Gabe.
Yeah, there's a lot to read. More or less, I wrote that it's still in a merge request, and so if you have feedback on it, that's great. We'll be iterating on it some more too. But the basic gist is the 1-year plan is written in the form of an internal press release. It's how Amazon does some of their product management, where to maintain vision over a long period of time, they work really hard at writing this press release and iterating on it to make it compelling and something that is exciting, and that also should help provide a little bit of context on the specific things that we want to work on. But I think the big goal for the next year is to be able to take some market share from Jira, but not to recreate Jira's features in like one-to-one parity. And I think a big part of that is going to be improving the usability of issue boards, bringing in some data into issue boards, making things more collaboration friendly. So real-time workflows on issue boards, on issues, and then improving the to-dos and kind of making a unified notifications task list type thing. And there's some other bullet points in there, but really want to clean things up and have a really nice user experience. Finish the refactoring over to GraphQL and Vue. But yeah, read through it. There's also one for portfolio management that Keenan wrote. So we're open to feedback. If there's something on there that like you don't agree with, bring it up. If there's something that you wish was on there that's not more explicitly called out, bring it up. Like I want this to be a group effort and a team effort, and everybody has a different perspective, and I would value everybody contributing to this. So that's that. On to this next item. This is in the
Gabe, sorry, before you go to that one, just have a question. What's the process then for that to be merged? Is there a timeline on that, so we can start kind of get it to be officially our kind of go-to 1 and 3 year plan?
Sure. So Eric is writing the 1 and 3 year plan for the entire dev section. So there's that step up. Then there's a stage level 1 and 3 year plan. Then it's broken down into the group level. So we've done the group level, which as soon as the new PM for Certify starts in a couple weeks, he'll work on the one for Certify. But that should then become the stage level plan. And I'm waiting to hear back from Eric whether or not we can leave it at the group level or if we need to break this into the category level. There's a lot of things that like don't fit neatly within the categories as they're defined. So we either need to like rectify that and move like the features into the right categories and go that way, or kind of treat them as separate things. So once we hear back from him, we will get that merged in, and then it will roll up to his dev section, if that makes sense. But once we do get it merged in, I'm going to take that and kind of break it into like one big epic to start with just a bunch of bullet points, to then start doing some of the roadmap and planning and like staging of what we're going to try to get done in each release, and kind of go back and forth with the team on the best path to get to the end goal, if that makes sense.
Cool, thank you.
And I think, Gabe, you said to me that the idea is that the 1 year plan especially should be like ambitious but achievable, right? Like it should be a little bit scary, but not like that's impossible as the reaction.
Right. Yeah. It should be ambitious. It should be achievable, and I think it's achievable by limiting. Like there's some gray area in how far you take some of the features. So we can either have like take them really far if we have the time, but the way I want to approach it is doing incremental and iterative, delivery on that stuff, so we can make those trade-off decisions as we go. And I think the general gist is like if we get 80%, 90% of the way there, we'll be in a really good position. And there's also like we need to leave room for the market changing and things happening, and so it's like it's not set in stone, and it will be updated as we learn more from working on what we're working on and listening to our customers and the wider community. So any other questions about that? Okay. The next one, this kind of ties into the big picture, in the vision we're talking about making the user experience more real time. In 12.4, we need to take the first step towards that. And so like we've talked about refactoring issue boards to kind of bring them up to speed with how we're using Vue today. And then we've also talked about some of the real-time functionality on the issue boards, and if it makes sense to start with the issue. Whichever one we start with, there's different approaches for how that can be implemented. And so like if we're going to be doing all these things simultaneously, I feel like we need to have a really tight coordination on how we're building it so that it supports gracefully supports the integration of real-time functionality without doing a bunch of refactoring. And like at the same time, we're also trying to move over to using GraphQL everywhere. And so like there's the conversations of, do we use Vuex or do we use Apollo? Like how do we do this? And since it is so kind of like it's an architecture decision, which is not my call, but I do see like there's some differing opinions on how to do it, that if we don't talk about it at this level, then I feel like there'll be a lot of disparate work and then rework as a result. So that's kind of what I wanted to talk about.
Yeah, I think the memory backend team were going to investigate the possibility of like adding WebSocket support, because I think the production team had some issues with that before, but like those may not be issues anymore. And we should probably, like I think Heinrich suggested in the issue, probably the smallest scope we could do, or a small scope at least. And I think if we sort of take one of those and try and coordinate with them, that's probably the way to go from the back-end side. From the front-end side, like Apollo, Vuex. I know these are words. I don't really have any insight beyond that.
Yeah, so I think we do want to keep the whole real-time functionality in mind as we're refactoring the issue boards. The problem is the refactor of issue boards is a major task. I do agree that we want to get to GraphQL everywhere. I think that has been decided. That's kind of the safe assumption. But as far as like the issue boards refactor, we don't want to, and Kushal, you're on the call, right? Yeah, you can comment on this also. But like we haven't, on the back end, have we determined that the next thing we want to move over to GraphQL is the APIs that issue boards use? because I don't want to commit to refactoring that completely to Apollo if the backend is not going to be in GraphQL for like way down the road.
So on the back end, I still have an MR for this, which I need Tim to approve because Christopher's waiting for Tim to approve it, where basically I say that the intent is that building new features happens in GraphQL where it makes sense. So there might be cases where it doesn't make sense, right? Like if you literally need to add like one field to an existing REST API, then probably like rebuilding that API in GraphQL is not the smallest change. But like the idea is that we would stop the gap from getting bigger between the GraphQL and the REST API, so that the GraphQL API backfill like doesn't increase in scope. For that backfill, I think we were going to start with the groups API. I put an issue for that on 12.3. Nobody started it yet. Partly that's because it was quite a long way down the list, partly because it was super vague. So I've asked Brett and Mario to like take a look at that this week and see how they can break that down. But that was just because like as the project management team, we kind of like own GraphQL in general. Like beyond that, we would just be taking, each team would be taking its own areas. So we could certainly prioritize boards for the project management team to make available in GraphQL like pretty easily. Like, you know, we don't have a strong case for doing the GraphQL support for existing resources in any particular order, is basically what I'm saying. So like if boards goes first, boards goes first, that's fine. I think, Brett, I don't know if that makes sense to you or if you want to comment there.
No, that makes sense to me. I mean, there's still quite a bit of interdependency between things, but yeah, whichever one, if boards is first, that's perfect.
Yeah, and for boards right now, I think it's slightly easier because we use an internal API rather than the public REST API. So those are typically more limited in scope than the public REST API as well. So like getting up to parity with that will hopefully be easier than getting up to parity with the public API as well.
Yeah, I think.
Just to add, yeah, go ahead, Jim.
I was just gonna say, I think just my main concern is having worked with both GraphQL and something Redux, which is more the same concept as Vuex. Like rewriting all of the issue boards using Vuex will be a lot of extra unnecessary work if we then switch to using Apollo and like Apollo's built-in cache mechanism, which is the same thing as Vuex, just a different package. And so like I wanted to help like avoid some of that extra work if possible, and especially if like we're going to use subscriptions through GraphQL and on the back end, like, and that's how we're going to do the real-time stuff, then it just like it seems silly to rewrite everything just to rewrite it without getting us really to the end state of now we can turn on WebSockets and subscriptions when they're ready, you know. That's all.
Yeah. So the only hesitation I have there is that I don't think that has been determined that is right now the end solution, and I'm scared. Well, maybe not scared, but I guess fearful that we're going to spend the time to refactor and get everything ready in boards, which again is a fairly large thing, and then us end up determining that, you know, WebSockets is not a real-time solution. Subscriptions is not where we want to get to, and then we end up with this huge boards code base that we have to refactor again to something else in the future. Like I'd prefer if we started off somewhat smaller. That's why on the real-time side, I like Heinrich's idea of starting with the sidebar. With something smaller, test out, get confirmation that WebSockets is good to go, is where we want to go, and then start figuring out how we're going to get there on the boards and some of the larger code bases.
Yeah, I think even if you don't use subscriptions and there's a different thing we do for real time, we're still using GraphQL. And we still want to use that instead of, you know, what we've been doing before, you know. So like you can layer on the subscription stuff on top of that, but at the end of the day, we still want to use GraphQL. So if we're going to refactor, we should refactor to that like goal, you know?
Yep, I agree. I don't think we have, and I know there's an RFC in Kushal. I think you actually created the RFC on the front end side, but I don't think it's been determined that Apollo is what we're going to use. If the end result for state management is going to replace Vuex. I think we're still trying to figure that part out also.
Okay. So breaking that down, there's two things. We need to determine what we're going to do for real-time support, and then we need to determine what we're going to do for front-end state management and like make decisions on those things. Is there anything that I can do to help contribute to those or remove blockers or make it easier to make a decision so that we can like move forward with these things? Or
yeah, definitely. Kushal, you want to?
Yeah, so a couple of points here. As we discussed, like sidebar is one of the key interaction areas when it comes to issue boards, where issue boards are not only responsible for reordering items, like that's one interaction. Another major interaction is updating the attributes for individual issues from the sidebar. So as you said, like Heinrich mentioned, like we should start with the sidebar. I think that's a great starting point. If we want to go with a GraphQL mutation API to update the sidebar, then backend is where we can start working for the sidebar updates. And then we already have another issue where we want to refactor write sidebar entries. So once we have the GraphQL backend available for updating the sidebar for any issuable object, we start updating the sidebar itself so that we have a single view component for the sidebar. And then we can start working on issue boards refactor, where we already have the sidebar component available to use. And then only things that remain there is integrating the reordering logic for individual issues within the list. And then we would already have sidebar backend implementation in place. And we won't have any further dependency to start working on the issue boards refactor. As far as state management is concerned, the RFC that I opened, just to give background around there, the Epic trees is where we realized a situation where we were using Vuex and GraphQL both at the same time. We were using GraphQL to fetch the data, and for other interactions like adding or removing issues into the tree or removing them from the tree is where we were using original Rails API that we had for older design. So we were using both of them, and it didn't feel right personally to me to have networking logic be spread across two areas. Like we would already do networking in the actions within Vuex. So I wouldn't keep GraphQL related networking logic or schema rather within the tree component itself. So we did use GraphQL, but we still basically separated out networking logic between components and actions. So that was one-off situation. But if we have everything available from the backend perspective in GraphQL, then I think it is fine that we use the schema information into the components and then do the state management without using Vuex at all. But as long as we are going to combine the two, it makes sense not to spread networking logic between two different places and have it in single place until we have everything either in the Rails side or in the GraphQL side.
Just one thing I wanted to note there. The one case that GraphQL doesn't make as good is if you want to use HTTP caching and polling, because GraphQL only uses post requests. There's a bunch of articles around this, but basically it's like create a get endpoint that does a specific post request. Is the upshot of that. So yeah, like that's a minor thing. We probably don't want to use HTTP caching for most of this, but it's just worth calling out there.
And one more thing regarding the real-time part. So we did come across similar situation when we were refactoring the merge request widget, where we explored an ability to use WebSockets to do real-time. But I spoke to Fatih regarding this, like what was the idea of not using WebSockets. And we concluded that it was purely for security reasons, especially when we don't want multiple connections open when a merge request is open in multiple places. Because currently user, even without logging in, can open a merge request and see updates to the widget happening in real time. So polling was the best choice for there. So I think even if we want to do real time for issue boards, I think polling is a better solution than to do WebSockets, because one can open issue boards without logging into GitLab. So I think it makes sense to have polling there instead of WebSockets.
Yeah, so I think, Gabe, you had commented somewhere where maybe we should spike this out. I don't know. I still feel like Sidebar is the best thing to help to prototype with the memory stage on real time and on WebSockets. As back to your question on if there's anything you can help with to make sure we don't or to make sure we move forward, I'll let you know if there is. There may be, you do have experience with Apollo, with some of the front end stuff. So maybe, feel free to comment on the RFCs. I can point you in the direction of those. I'm also working with Tim on how we move some of these discussions forward. But yeah, in other words, I'll let you know how you can help. I'm sure there are ways.
Cool. Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Awesome. Are there any other, maybe for next meeting, we'll start doing some demos of some of the work that we've done in the past week. It doesn't look like we have anything else for now, so we can probably move on to workflow. And Sean?
Yeah, so actually when I wrote this, we hadn't merged the MR that I've linked to, but now we have. So let me just change that. So we've changed the milestone dates. So that means we have a little bit longer to figure this out. So the 12.4, the time we start using the 12.4 milestone for development is on the 18th of September. So 2 weeks today. Now, in 12.3, because it was kind of a transition thing, we were using workflow ready for development on some things, but not on everything, because we were still sort of working through this. So I had a couple of questions on should we say that everything that is in 12.4 that we have weighted, and everything that's already in 12.3 that's not blocked should have the ready for development label? I guess this is mainly a question for Gabe and Keenan, although Keenan's not here, so it's a question for Gabe.
Yes and no. I think if you feel confident that the issue, if it's a big one, is ready for development, right? So one that's not that we know we want to do is the WebSocket stuff, but we haven't gotten clarity on how we're going to do it. So it's technically not ready for development, so it should still be in the planning breakdown until we make a decision and have a clear path forward. And I think that's where part of the goal of this is to have a more continuous flow of issues instead of doing a batch of 6 weeks. We can say we're going to do this in this milestone, and which means we have to figure out how to make a decision on this and move it forward so that we can get ready for development, so that we can get started, right? And so I think anything for 12.4 should live in planning breakdown, probably 2 schedule, and then one of the workflow labels. In the future, I would like to get to the point where we can start with something for an upcoming milestone in the validation backlog, and we can move it through the entire workflow in one release cycle. And I think that's why there are some issues that I'm going to go back and update the milestones on that are still in the validation backlog, so we haven't gotten to them. Which means if they're not ready for development, that means they can't be started, which means they can't be done for that milestone. So I guess that's where anything that's not in planning breakdown doesn't need to be weighted at this point.
So I guess so in general, we would have at say a given point, we would have fewer issues in a future milestone, in a specific future milestone, but we would be bringing more issues through that process of going through the validation stages and then the planning breakdown. So they would be coming in sort of regularly rather than in chunks, essentially. Yeah. Okay. So for 12.4, we can take the issues and just check that they are in valid states, basically, like, you know, the issues that we have in the 12.4 milestone, because also that's an external communication to the wider community, to customers, to users, etc. Like, we are going to be able to like get those broken down in time and work on them. And if not, we can address that. So if something's in like solution validation and the current milestone is the example I gave like further down, like that seems like typically that's a mistake. Like, it shouldn't be in the current milestone if it's still in solution validation, or it's been added to the current milestone, but we haven't taken it out of solution validation. Is that right?
Yeah, theoretically for now, because we're not moving fast enough like through each of the different steps to get through the whole workflow in a given release. But in the future, that would be an ideal thing where we can say, hey, we need to validate this. Let's put together a day-long activity that we are going to use to validate this. The next day, let's move it into planning breakdown. The next day, let's move it into schedule. And the next day, it gets moved into ready for dev. So like within a matter of a week, we should be able to move and give an issue through all of the different like states that are before the workflow labels.
Right, but in that case, until it got out to schedule, it wouldn't be in a milestone, right? Because we wouldn't actually be.
Correct. Yeah, I think we can probably remove that makes sense. We can remove milestones from anything that is not in planning breakdown or beyond. That makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, I'll go through and take a look. Also, Donald's pointed out that Keenan actually isn't on the invite list to this meeting, so I'm gonna fix that. Sorry, Keenan, if you're watching the recording. It was an honest mistake. Okay, Donald, does that make sense to you as well? Because I guess we've both got to go, and John as well, got to go through and sort of make sure that this is being followed.
Yeah, I think that I had a similar question a while ago, and like Gabe said, ideally we'd be able to, you know, if it was in the current milestone and it had a validation, or is in the validation phase, that would just mean that, okay, we got to get it moving forward. We got to get it into one of the workflow stages within a day or so. I don't think we're ready yet, you know, like Gabe said, to do that. So I think the best thing is, just remove the milestones from things that are not in planning breakdown and beyond.
I'm going to hang out with the designers. I have some time with them already scheduled for this afternoon. And so I will talk to them about like workflows for the top part of the funnel, or, you know, whatever workflow, to figure out what we can do to optimize that and kind of set some expectations around how that should work. And then we'll put that in the handbook or somewhere, just so that there's a little bit more clarity around this stuff, because I can see why it's confusing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, like, to be clear, like, I'm not super worried about this. I'm just making sure that like I'm on the same page as you, and that we are like, that we do have the same end goal in mind. Anybody else got any comments on that section? Okay, cool. So the only other thing I wanted to add was I'm out for the next 2 weeks. So if someone else could please, I think Gabe, Donald, and John are all able to be hosts. If you could record and upload this to YouTube, that would be great. Have a good week, everybody. And speak to you all soon.
Bye.